So for our last speaker this afternoon, can I introduce Martin Duffy. Martin's a director of Buro Happold, and as you can see, bears a striking resemblance to Buddy Holly.
Really?
Martin, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for the introduction, George. Well, we've heard some really fascinating discussions, or we've been involved in fascinating discussions during the course of today. We've heard about the Highways Maintenance Efficiency Programme, and I'm sure that every one of us sat in this room here should be thinking about how can we support such a programme going forward, because you know what? That's our business. And then there's been a lot of discussion around these reducing budgets and how we're going to feel squeezed about being able to deliver service that we're responsible for delivering. But also that's an objective that we've really got to be able to meet. And then we've heard Dana talk about how true partnership can deliver really high value between public and private sector organisations working together. So I'm going to endeavour to keep everyone awake just for this next 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to ask you to join me on my journey of some tales of adventure on the highway. First of all, before I talk about where is it that we've managed to get to, or indeed where is it that we might be going to in the future, I thought it'd be useful just to spend a few moments and touch base and talk about where is it that we've come from. Now, George is on this slide, not because he's my timekeeper today and that he'll kick me off if I overrun. And as I look at the clock, I can see I'm already about 17 minutes behind, 1 minute into my presentation, which is not good. And nor is George on this slide because he used to work behind a bar when he was a student. George is on this slide because, like me, he's been around a while. And he's witnessed a number of these initiatives, and he's experienced firsthand how these initiatives that have been introduced into our world have affected the way that we've had to go about delivering the service. And if I look back to the earlier days of my career, and I think, my word, compulsory competitive tendering, I looked up the date, 1988. I thought, God, was it really that long ago? You know, when I was a few stone lighter and a young engineer at Norfolk County Council. For me, it opened up a whole new way in which the public sector, private sector, were going to be able to engage in delivering public sector services. And for me, it was a cornerstone. It was a major event. It was the forerunner of everything that we've got today. So about these fantastic partnerships and relationships that we've managed to develop today, I think CCT has been a massive influencer on that. Can you remember things like, and we've heard about some of these things today, Latham, Egan, Best Value, Sir Peter Gershon, but just a few of the initiatives that have been introduced into our world and resulted in us delivering services slightly differently, and have resulted in us thinking about delivery mechanisms and models that might better suit some of the particular circumstances that we're in at that moment in time. In terms of some of these models, you'll all be familiar with all of these, I'm guessing, that are up there on this windscreen wiper diagram, as I call it. And we used to put forward a very strong argument that for a local highway authority that had, you know, very strong managerial and technical capability, that had really good plant and office facilities and wonderful depots in great locations, then the models over on the right-hand side of this diagram might best suit its needs. So somewhere round the in-house type service delivery. And authorities that were in a very different position than that would be forced into looking at models that sat more over on the left-hand side of this diagram. And we've seen, and I still see today, that there are numerous, every single one of these models is in a local government highways department right now. There's one near you right now. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But over the course of the last number of years, we've seen a sort of steady transition away from the models on the right-hand side. So I think that we're seeing more of an engagement with the private sector. Now, is that a good or is that a bad thing? It was at this moment in time that David was actually going to join me on stage. But he spoke to me just before I came over and said, Martin, I've decided I'm not going to join you up on stage for this session. And he said, it's nothing to do. We had the advice that I've just received from St. John's Ambulance. He said, what it is, he said, I've got a particularly tight suit on. But in all seriousness, Dave Hutchinson and many of you in this room have been through the splits on how many occasions I don't know. But if you look at this particular model here and you think about its application, this is about a public sector engaging with the private sector. You can see that this particular client is wanting to maintain some sort of influence and control over the customer engagement, wanting to maintain that control and direction over the policy and strategy, which leaves the private sector responsible for things like planning, managing, and delivering that service. Now, models like this, you might think it strikes a resemblance to the MAC model that exists today within the Highways Agency, and certainly to many of the integrated services that we have between public and private sector within local highway authorities. So we've got our models, and we've continued to tweak those models in order to drive that little bit more value out of them on a year-by-year basis so that we can report that additional incremental improvement and cashable efficiency. But what about the trends? What trends have emerged? Well, I suppose first and foremost for me, partnership working has not completely replaced traditional contracting, but it is well on its way. We've seen these longer terms and larger scopes so that clients can benefit from the economies of scale that are available through using a model of that nature. And we've seen alternative pricing mechanisms, and we've heard something about alternative pricing mechanisms today, and we've talked about lump sum and target cost and schedule of rates, and we've seen, some say that maybe schedule of rates is, a traditional way of doing it, and yet we're seeing it come back into the fore in a number of our contracts now. And I've put it here as a positive. I was in two minds about where to place alternative pricing mechanisms, because I think as an industry, we're absolute complete experts when it comes to the theory of pricing mechanisms. Now, I don't know that we could claim that when we look at the application in our contracts, because through my experience, I still see that clients and providers spend an awful lot of time talking about, well, that's not cost reimbursable activity, that's part of the lump sum. Or how have you arrived at this particular target cost? So in terms of application, I think we've still got a wee bit further to go on our journey. So if those are the positives, what are those areas that perhaps we could do with improving, perhaps we could do with putting a wee bit more effort into? The word collaboration's come up a number of times today, and here it is again appearing in my presentation. I think we've had some great successes, in truth, in the public sector, but for the back office type functions, transactional type services, I think they've led the way with client collaboration, and it's resulted in some really great cashable efficiencies. I think there's something maybe that our industry can learn from what's gone on with the back office function. Now, I know that it's not unheard of in the highways sector for us to be using client collaboration and joint procurement, etc., but I still would hold that there is more that we should be doing there. I think I'm on really safe ground if I say that we're performance measurement experts. If I look back a decade, it was a case of, if it moved, measure it. And now we're in a position where it's about, we've really refined our systems and refined them quite well. And they report good data, meaningful data that we can act upon. And the reason I've got performance management there is that I don't believe that we act as we should on the performance data that we receive through the performance measurement systems. So about robust management of our contracts, again, is something that I think that we could improve upon. It says consistency in procurement. It should be about inconsistency in procurement. How long has our industry talked about a standardised pre-qualification questionnaire? And then all of you guys who are involved in bidding sat there thinking, I've never seen 2 pre-qualification questionnaires the same. And you're right, because I don't believe that there are 2 pre-qualification questionnaires the same. We could really do with getting our act together over that to save time and to save effort and to save cost. Competitive dialogue. Well, this is a process which we've seen more and more of over the course of the last 5 years. Again, there's some inconsistency, how we approach competitive dialogue, how we use it. I've seen competitive dialogue used in circumstances where the restricted procedure would have been far better, would have saved a fortune in the procurement cost. But it had been decided that competitive dialogue would be used for that particular procurement, and vice versa. So I've seen the restricted procedure used when the specification wasn't sufficiently well developed, when the thought of where to place risk hadn't been discussed. So still more work for us to do in terms of procurement. And I've just mentioned risk there. And they always say, don't they, try to transfer too much risk and it represents poor value. Transfer too little risk, and that does exactly the same. Both of those scenarios result in unnecessarily high cost. It's something that we've got to hit bang on the mark in terms of the allocation of risk. It's really where there is money to be lost associated with misallocation of risk. If you're using the restricted procedure, then have those discussions pre-procurement. Have it in that phase called soft market testing, or whatever it is that you'd wish to call it. But do have those discussions with the market. Bring the market in and talk about where risk associated with your contract would best sit between the 2 parties. And if you're using competitive dialogue, then do that during the formal procurement itself. So we've got our models, and we've continued to tweak them, and we've squeezed that little bit more value out of our models. We've got our service splits, and we understand where to draw that line from one authority to another. And then we even have done some analysis over the trends. And here says Phil, I'd like more. And he's not talking about profit, and he's not talking about turnover, although he may well want that. But what Phil's talking about is, I'd like better results in our industry. This was a Morris survey that gave this data. So there is definite scope for improvement. I know that some of you will be sat in the room and you'll be thinking, well, with the reducing budgets, there's absolutely no chance. Those results are just going to get worse. But think about, and we've heard about it already today, about the application of appropriate standards, which is what Graham was talking about in his ASC contract. So it's not the gold-plated approach, if that's the right phrase for it, that we might have adopted in the past. This is about getting best bang for the buck and getting the job done and something which is serviceable.